Hello friends, this is Growl. This will be the first video in a new series where I spotlight different bosses and explain their mechanics in depth and how I approach healing them. This will be focused on Resto Druid specifically, but I hope that the information will be relatable for any healers. One of the most common bosses people struggle with is Overseer Korgus, the last boss in Dagor. This can be one of the hardest parts of Dagor, and it is heartbreaking to deplete a key in the final minutes of the dungeon. So today I'll go over everything you need to know about healing this boss. First, let's talk about Explosive Burst. The main mechanic of the fight is Explosive Burst. It does a large amount of damage to 3 members of your party, and the goal of the fight is to heal people up from one Explosive Burst before they get targeted by the next. In high keys, the Explosive Burst is almost your entire health bar, so whoever is targeted needs to be at full health or they'll likely die. If you're reaching a level where you're getting close to one shot, you may want to use some avoidance, as well as versatility food, and especially War Scroll of Fortitude for your party. The most important thing to note about Explosive Burst is that it always prioritizes range players over melee players. For example, our group here has a druid and a mage, so 2 of the 3 explosive bursts will always be on us, and the third will be chosen at random between our 3 melee players. Already, I can start putting together pieces of our strategy, as I know I'll have to be prioritizing healing on myself and the mage. The second thing about Explosive Burst is that it can either knock you back or apply a damage over time effect. The general counter to this is to have your party fight here in the corner, with everyone having their backs to the wall. This way, if you get knocked back, you stay in the same place. In this clip, our tank does a good job of positioning the boss so that the corner I'm in is also safe from cross ignition, but this doesn't always happen, and it's fine to just step to the side during it if you have to. The other added benefit of tanking in the corner is that you're safe from cannons. There are cannons positioned around the boss room that turn and shoot occasionally, and staying in this corner prevents you from getting shot by the cannons. This is more or less the general accepted strategy on how to deal with this boss in high keys. The Deadeye from the boss can also be a bit of a pain, but keep in mind your teammates can use anything that dodges or parries to negate its effect. It's common to have a Demon Hunter or Brewmaster solo each shot by themselves. It's still healable without that, just be sure to communicate to your team that you need someone to soak it if you're targeted twice in a row. Lastly, let's talk about the spell order from the boss. The spell order generally goes through a cycle. Azerite rounds, then Explosive Burst, then Cross Ignition, and finally Deadeye. This is what is commonly referred to as a single, one Explosive Burst per cycle. However, as with many bosses in WoW, it's possible for the spell order to get a bit jumbled. There are lots of theories as to what jumbles the spell order, however the most common situations are when Shadow Meld or Feigned Death is used during a mechanic, or when the boss isn't in melee range of the tank during the fight. If the spell order gets out of whack, you can actually get 2 explosive bursts in a row. This is what's called a double. You know you've got a double when immediately after the Deadeye, the boss casts Explosive Burst instead of Azerite Rounds. This means the order is going to be Explosive Burst, Azerite Rounds, Explosive Burst again, Cross Ignition, and then Deadeye. This is especially scary because you have less than 10 seconds to bring anyone affected by both Explosive Bursts from nearly 0 to full health. Dealing with Explosive Bursts is an exercise on cooldown management. Before we go over the clip, let's talk about what each player can do to help with this. First of all, you should absolutely be never using a strong defensive during a single. A single gives you plenty of time to heal in between, so unless things are going crazy and you're going to die from the hit, you should never be pressing a valuable defensive button during a single. Small things like Rogue Feign or DK Deathstrike are fine to use to help the healer, however, you should never be expending a big defensive cooldown like Ice Block or Turtle during a single. During a double, there needs to be a strong communication between players to understand who is using what. Generally, I prefer to tell my DPS players when to use their immunities so that they don't overlap in windows where I have strong healing going on, and then not have them when I'm running dry later. During doubles, you need to have a plan in mind and a concise spell order, because you have almost no time for thinking and every global counts. My preferred method is have Efflow on the ground with Life Bloom and Rejuve on myself, as well as Rejuve on any other range players that are going to be affected by the double. Before the first explosive burst hits, I bear form to increase my max HP, and then immediately after, I wild growth to apply some mastery and healing to everybody in the group. I then spam regrowths on myself and any ranged player to top them, followed by a swift mend on whoever needs it. You can also trank at this time, but with a 3-minute cooldown, you generally only get one per fight. On the first double, I barkskin myself and iron bark a ranged player. If we continue getting doubles, I will then ask for immunities so that I can catch up and focus on keeping myself alive. Eventually, the barks will come back and I can use them again. If doubles still keep happening, that's when you bust out the health potions and health stones. Remember, the most important thing is that you keep yourself alive. As a druid, you can battle res teammates. So if you really have to, you can just let a teammate die to the double to conserve mana and defensives. If you die trying to save a teammate, it will likely lead to a wipe, unless you have another good battle res available. Now that you have a good understanding of the fight, let's watch over a 25 Tyrannical Dagor I did earlier and talk about how we can apply this into our gameplay. So the first thing you'll notice is that our tank is trying to stay in melee range of the boss from the moment he pulls it. I don't know if this makes a huge difference, however it does seem to help. You'll notice here we have myself positioned here in this corner and the maid's positioned where his back is to the wall here, where we're just spread out enough so we're not cleaving each other with explosive burst. I'm making sure that I'm keeping my F-Low on myself and the mage, and then I'm keeping Rejuve on myself and the mage as well as Life Bloom on myself. It's important to keep as high uptime on Life Bloom and F-Low as you can during this fight. Generally, you can just be using Cenarian Ward on cooldown to conserve mana, but you could also be using it to try and heal through doubles as well, if you're short on burst healing. You'll see again, it's the same thing every time. Rejuve on myself and the mage, F-Low and Life Bloom up, and then using Regrowth and then Swift Mend if needed. So here comes the Deadeye. We'll look at the next spell to see if it's a double. The next spell is Azerite Rounds, so we know the boss is still on track and doing its normal rotation. Anytime I have free time during this, I'm trying to reapply my Sunfire and Moonfire. I'm not trying to be a monkey, I just really want this boss to die, because as soon as the spell queuing gets messed up, stuff can get really hairy. Again, here comes the Deadeye, so I'm just watching to see what the next order will be. Here is an explosive burst, so I know this is going to be a double. So immediately, my next few globals, I'm putting Iron Bark on the mage, I'm bark skinning myself, I have my rejuves up, my F-Low was just renewed, my Life Bloom is running out here. So then you can see I bear form, I immediately wild growth and then regrowth, and I'm focusing mostly on topping myself and the mage. Yoda, our rogue, was hit by the first explosive burst. However, because it's choosing 1 out of 3 melee players at random, I'm not really worrying about the melee and instead just focusing on myself and our mage. You can see the second of the double targeted Dorky, and since he's our tank, he's not in too much danger, as well as he can just use AMS and Death Strike to keep himself alive. At this point, once the double is over, there's not a huge rush to top everyone, so if the fight is going to go long, especially on Tyrannical, you do want to just be conserving mana at this point. I decide to just trank to make sure everyone's topped because the fight seems to be going fine, and I'm mainly just conserving mana. However, that maybe would have not been the best use for trank, and I should have saved it. Now after the Deadeye, we can see we get Azerite rounds again, so we know this is going to be a single. I can then get into cat form, reapply my dots, get my Sunfire and Moonfire up. Every time I see the single, I generally take a breath and then continue on making sure I get my damage up because I know the healing isn't going to be too intense. In this key, you can see I'm choosing to run Formless Major so I can steal Lucid Dreams from the mage if I need to on this fight. Again, here we had the Deadeye, then the Explosive Burst, and now Azerite rounds. It seems that whatever happened seemed to have gotten the boss jumbled on spell order, and now he's using his doubles. I'm using my Formless Major to steal Lucid to help with a little mana and leech, but it's not really necessary. I'm noticing here that my mage is, I think, so this is the second one, and I don't quite have my Iron Bark available, so I asked my mage here to Ice Block just to help me keep up, and I can focus mainly on myself. You can see I'm only prioritizing myself here because the chance of Psycho being chosen again is pretty low, and also he has Netherwalk if needed, so I'm only keeping myself alive here. You can see if the mage waits and uses his ice block late, he can actually ice block the entire double. So this whole time, all I'm doing is just making sure myself is staying alive. Yoda gets chosen by the second one, and you can see that the only immunity we needed to use there was the Mage Ice Block. Even though the Demon Hunter and the Rogue were both chosen, they were only chosen by one, and they still have both of their immunities that they can save for later if I need help. And then now we're getting a single because it was Azerite rounds after the Deadeye, and so I'm not worrying too much or using my spells. Again, the same spell order. Wild Growth immediately after, using some regrowths once that Explosive Burst hits and Cultivation procs. My Efflo is falling down, I renew it right there. Now here's Azerite rounds again after the Deadeye, so I know this is going to be a single. At this point, I'm recognizing that I have plenty of mana. The boss at most is only going to get one or maybe two more doubles. So I'm just, at this point, I may decide to use my defensives or whatever I have available. This is the most important part, is watching this part. We're seeing Deadeye. We're waiting to see what the next spell is. And it's Azerite rounds, so we know that it's going to be a single, so we're not too worried. We're just using Solar Wrath. Again, if this was a part where we saw it was a double, we would be ramping hots and preparing, but because we know it's a single, there's not too much worry. I'm taking my Innervate again here just because I may as well, why not? Our mage ends up caughting there from something, I don't really know what it was. Again, Azerite rounds after the Deadeye, so we know this is going to be a single, and this boss is pretty much wrapped up. So thanks for watching. I hope this video helps you understand this boss fight a little bit better. Our mage is dead. If you have any questions about the fight or comments as to what bosses you'd like to see next, I will continue still doing my dungeon review series, but I did want to do these as sort of a highlight on specific bosses so I could go more in depth to how the mechanics work. So drop a comment if you have any questions or comments as to what boss you want to see next. Happy keying.